All right. Thanks for tuning into the Limitless Learning Podcast, where we talk all things the future of education. And now we have Shira Wolf Cohen, who's one of the founding partners for Innovageous, here to talk about a really beautiful way that they've been going into schools and having just a forward-thinking way of bringing, reforming education and kind of, developing solutions. So how are you doing today, Shira?
I'm great. Happy to be here on this first day of October as we're recording in the fall.
Maybe you can start with a bit of the origin story of what inspired Innovageous and how it kind of came to be.
Yeah. So Innovageous is just 5 years old. We were launched in the summer of 2020. And the story behind our launch is really about school leaders who were moving their communities online and also had some hard decisions to make about next steps. And while we thought we were moving on to next steps that were actually in new school homes, it actually turned out it wasn't really the time to be interviewing and finding a new school home when we didn't know the communities, we couldn't go there in person. And
Hmm.
so my colleague, Joanna, and my sister, Alicia, who are my two co-founders, we started just having conversations. For many years, we've been talking about opening a school, starting a school together. And we
Hmm.
started talking about what that looked like to maybe not open a school, but open another educational entity that
Yeah.
supported schools and built capacity and had a wider reach than just one school. And so in that, we made a decision to start Innovageous as our next steps as educational leaders to support schools and systems and ensuring two things: continuity of learning for all
Hmm.
students and inclusive opportunities. And that mission of those two things stays true to this day. And while it
Hmm.
started as we will work with you to be able to translate and identify what your needs are for your community during COVID and during virtual learning and hybrid learning and what systems needed to take place and what professional
Yeah.
development was important for leaders, it's transitioned into a much more sustainable mission because continuity of learning is about students learning in school and out of school during the school year and during the summer, from K-12 learning into higher ed, between community-based programs and in-school programs, between workforce and education, right? That's continuity of learning. And
Yeah.
inclusive opportunities for every young person means that every young person is given the opportunity to explore their passions, figure out their strengths, determine what their next steps will be, learn alongside their peers, and
Mm.
engage in rigorous, engaging curriculum that's relevant to who they are as people and their community.
Of course. That's beautiful. So can you tell me, you mentioned you had a bunch of conversations around what's the next step, and maybe you can tell me something that came up in that gave you a clear direction of what problems you wanted to solve, and maybe how
Yeah,
that was informed by your experience before.
yeah.
Yeah.
When we started talking, we really started talking about capacity building of
Hmm.
folks. And so, again, in our mission, it talks about we work to build the capacity and to implement these sustainable solutions. We always say, like, if we're working with a partner on the same project from year to year or month to month, right, and they call us back again to do the same thing, we did not do it right. And so, those two themes of capacity building of the adults that are in schools, that are in classrooms, that are running districts, that are in higher ed community based education programs,
Hmm.
those people are the people that we work with. They are the people that we work with to build their capacity. And so when we were starting to talk about what this could look like, and we knew what the impact on young people was going to be, right? Continuity of learning and inclusive opportunities. We knew it had to happen through building the capacity of the adults in the building, building up their capacity through professional development, through hard conversations, through looking at data and analyzing data, through having
Yeah.
reflective practices and professional learning, and that those solutions had to be things that were sustainable. We leave every single partnership with tools, implementation tools, progress monitoring tools, toolkits for implementation, right? And so those two things kind of emerged as themes because we know we're always going to want to implement with schools innovative and courageous or innovageous
Yeah.
solutions,
Yeah.
but we also know that it has to be sustainable because if they call us back for the same thing, we did not do it right.
Yeah. So you want to implement something that really fits and lasts and works and proves itself over time instead of them having to call you back and consistently solve.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we have to make sure that, if they are coming back, that we're engaging in those reflective practices, that we're having thought partnership, that we're sharing resources so that we can troubleshoot what was the barrier for continuing the work, and then making sure that we're, adjusting along the way. We like to say to people always say, like, tell us your menu. And it's like, well, our menu
Your
is
menu.
extensive, right? Our menu is
Yeah.
extensive because we are like a boutique consulting firm, and we are
Hmm.
consistently talking to leaders and talking to schools and talking to communities to find out what their needs are, and then working alongside them to figure out what those approaches, solutions, strategies can be.
Brilliant. So taking this menu metaphor, I love that right away. How do you go about when you first go into in a learning environment and you are
Mhm.
seeking out, diagnosing, what are the main issues here? What are the main ways we can help and solve? What does that look like for you to go in, and what are the main things you
Yeah.
focus on? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So one of our, we don't have a menu of services. We have categories and we have buckets, right? And
Yeah.
so one of our core services is around landscape analysis work, which is it's like the step before we go and do strategic planning, right? It's to level set, it's to understand, it's to dig into the whys, it's to collect the data, right? So that we can do our strategic planning and action planning informed. And so we do a lot of landscape work, everything from going into schools and looking at instruction to doing landscape work to help schools figure out what other communities they might want to expand into. We even look at specific programming, right? And so we might look at special education programming. And so
Yeah.
we do a lot of landscape work, and throughout the whole process, we've developed over the 5 years, like, what is our collaborative process, and we take leaders through something where we are walking side by side. We don't walk around and collect data and then say to leaders, here's the data. This is what the data
Hmm.
showed us. We walk side by side. We have aligned collection tools. We have conversations where we bring out protocols and reflection tools that allow us to pull out what are the strengths, right?
Yeah.
What are the areas we want to work on? What are some action steps that we need to take to work on these things?
Right.
Right? And to start that brainstorming, we also do a lot of reflective work with leaders on understanding the why, because we can come up with strategies to address gaps in learning, address gaps in operations or in systems. But unless we can identify the why, we might come up with the wrong strategy.
Mm.
And so another huge piece of what we do is digging into that why to make sure that the root cause of why this data says what it says is what we work to address. And so all along this whole time, we are walking side by side with leaders. We
Yeah.
are not bringing information to them that they don't know. They are helping to collect. It helps to build buy-in. It helps for them to
Yeah.
see data with transparency, right? And it allows us to have an aligned lens, because when we go into classrooms, when we walk in the hallways, we walk with aligned tools to collect specific data points of things that we're looking on related to hallway behavior, related to students on task, related to
Yeah.
student engagement, right? Whatever
Yeah.
the specific lens is that we are looking at.
Mm.
And so that for us has allowed for a lot of buy in and a lot of trust, right? Because we are seeing the same things as you, and maybe we're seeing a different perspective or we're able to bring a different lens, but the walking side by side is the key piece, and the ongoing reflection, ongoing data analysis that leads to the next steps.
So yeah, I'm hearing that there's this deeply involved and communicative relationship that starts with, being very clear and, like you said, step by step, you know, going along with them to make it very clear which, this is why we're doing what we're doing. This is what this means, not just kind of setting it there and then stepping back. And also getting very clear on the purpose, right? The why, and then so
Mhm.
you're targeting what's most important. Yeah,
A
it's
thousand
very good
percent.
answer.
And no matter what project we are working on with a partner, I always say to people, like, what we're doing changes. How we
Mhm.
do it is always the same, right? How
Yeah,
we do it involves us as Innovageous team members to deepen our own understanding, right? I'm never going to come to the table and ask you something I could have read on your website.
Yeah.
right? So deepening that understanding, asking questions, reading artifacts, doing the research so that we can work to do that collaborative planning that we just talked about, that walking side by side, that collecting that data, that having thought partnerships,
Yeah.
resource sharing, right? And we always work to have aligned actions. We're never going to start a partnership and it not know where it's going. We have really clear actions that we follow. We progress monitor them. We have feedback and reflection, right? Throughout every single one of our partnerships, which is what makes us a little bit different, is that the what we do changes from client to client. How we do it and our process, we have a very clear process. Of course, we are culturally responsive to different communities. We learn about individual needs. We try to make sure that we have our materials be accessible and equitable so that different backgrounds can understand it, right? Our team is bilingual. And so sometimes we have to tap into some of those skills that our team members have. And so there's lots of different ways that we make sure that our process is also customized for each
Yeah.
of our clients and partners.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like that. One of the keys is having that deep curiosity, wanting to go a layer deeper, wanting to really understand the culture that you're working with and what are what's really going on here? What can we really learn from this that would inform how we do this unique work, right? Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes we have to have really hard conversations with
Yeah.
school leaders. And I'm going to be honest, it is not that 100% of the time they're like, oh, yes, we hear you, we understand, right? We have
Hmm.
had to have scenarios where we bring in another team member to have another conversation, or we take a pause and give people time to think, right? Because sometimes we have to have these hard conversations, and having hard conversations and these truths that we tell people and like share with them, again, is not rooted in our opinion. And so I think that's one of the key things about the data collection and evidence-based practice and research is that hearing my opinion of what I think should happen is a lot different than looking at data and evidence-based practices and aligning those things to share, right? And so I think for us, we also really work to build a space where people feel psychologically safe to be a little bit, be a little bit vulnerable with us. We always say our first 10 minutes of our meetings with leaders are always a little bit of a partnership meeting and a little bit of a therapy session, right? Because we want to give that space and we need to do things. You mentioned approaching with curiosity. That is literally one of the skills that
Yeah.
we use. We also train leaders in. We also work to ensure that we are using body language and communications that doesn't feel that we're making judgments. We also work to make sure that we're tapping into strengths, right? Not just of young people, but of adults. And let's start from where we are, not what the gap is. And so all of those things help to promote this space with partners where we can have hard conversations.
Yeah. 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 Really having that depth of collaboration and feeling like you're on the same page with them as opposed to it kind of just being this like clunky business operation. It's more like we really want you to feel like we're a team,
Yeah.
very closely connected.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier about, having sensitivity to the students' unique needs, right? Or their
Yep.
unique experience, whether that's with the languages, or maybe you can
Mhm.
go a little bit deeper on how you go about addressing that and factoring in the student's experience to make it
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this
specialized.
this is a great like alignment also, I think, to my new book is called Leading Future Focused Schools. It came out
Mhm.
in July. And it is really about how we engage and prepare students for career success. And that is not about saying to students, here are 5 jobs, why don't you pick? Or asking a third grader what they want to be when they grow up. It's about first starting by them building their own awareness of who they are, what their values are, what they're good at, what they like to do, what they don't like
Yeah,
to do, how they work
yeah,
with other people, right? And so the first part of this and starting to think about young people and them figuring out who they are is to really give them the space to figure out who they are, to share who they are, to explore different
Mhm.
activities, to tap into their strengths and name those strengths, right? And that
Yeah,
has to happen. There's not a curriculum for that, right? There's not a here's the curriculum to tap into student strengths. It is something, a skill, a mindset that our educators have to have in their classrooms because it is much more prominent to see the student that consistently is not scoring proficient on tests or exams to point out that they didn't do well. What we instead need to do is look at the piece that they did do well. Where is their starting point? Where do they have skills that might be foundational to this content area, right? Where can I point them out and bring them out of young people? And I think this is where we're not always doing the best job, right?
Mhm.
We have a lot of teachers that will say, I teach math, right? I use math because I was a math teacher, but B, I think a lot of students, it's probably the subject area that most students will say like, oh, I'm not a good math person. No one ever says I'm not a good social studies person or I'm not a good English person, but people say I'm not a good math person all the time.
Yeah.
But imagine if you were in a classroom where that teacher was maybe not pointing out every time you got a 70, what are all the things you didn't get, but instead was naming the things that you did get
Yeah.
and pointing
Exactly.
out how what you did do and asking you to explain that thing that you got right to other people. And maybe they're noticing that your math facts and your fluency facts are not good, but you can read that paragraph and pull out what it's asking and
Mhm.
partner you with someone who does have those fluency facts, right? So that you
Yeah.
all can work together and build on each other's strengths. And I think in the book, we really start and talk about how we do that. How do you pull out strengths? There are lots of intentional strategies that we can use, but there are also lots of day-to-day things, which are the things that I just talked about that we can do, whether that is partnering students up, whether that is naming specifically their strengths, whether that is starting from the glass half full when they don't
Mm.
do well on an assessment and talking about what they did do well instead of what they didn't do well, right?
Exactly.
And these are all the first phase of that career development continuum is building awareness and identity for our young people so that they can know what I'm going to explore. If I hate blood, I'm not going to go explore being a doctor or a
Yeah. Yeah.
phlebotomist,
Yeah.
right? Maybe I might explore something else if I really like science and medicine, but I'm not going to explore that. And so I think that's part of this is getting to know who you are and what you're good at and what you like to do so that you can start to think about what's possible with who you are.
Yeah. I mean, this is a concept that we see extend throughout the corporate world, people's careers, all the way down to these early learning phases, is emphasizing strengths, right? This seems to be a very effective strategy at getting people to capitalize on what they're naturally inclined to, and also learn how to integrate where their weaknesses are. What are some of the strategies that you're utilizing to not only give out this strength-based coaching to the kids, but also how, prepare them for the future they're heading into?
Yeah, it's really interesting. The foreword of the book is written by not an educator, a CEO of a hospitality company, one of the world's leaders in sustainable fabrics for hotels and all these other things. And she talks about in the foreword of the book, she doesn't mention any of the skills around design or fabrication or measurement or production. She talks about all of those, what I call cross-sector skills. They can be durable skills, 21st century skills, right? A zillion different words for that. What she talks about is the deep need for these skills in young people that she's looking for. She's like, she can teach some of the design work, some of the measurements, some of the manufacturing, some of the customer relations. But what she can't teach them is the time management, the problem solving, the ability to be flexible,
Hmm.
creative, adaptable, right? And when we think about the careers that are coming in the future, we actually don't know what they are. But
Hmm.
what we can be sure of is
Yeah.
that they are going to need adaptability and
Yeah.
flexibility and creativity and problem solving and conflict management, right? Like, and working with other people. And so when we start to think about this in schools, it's not about preparing students for a specific career, especially in elementary and middle school. It is about preparing them to have these skills so that they can identify which ones are going to be the ones that they tap into because they're going to need it for this upcoming job, right? And their future career. Because there are careers, if you would have said 15 years ago, 20 years ago, the idea that internet influencers would
Hmm.
be a job, right? A career where people
Yeah.
make a lot of money. People
Hmm.
would have been like, that's a joke, right? Yes, there are going to be some people, famous people, but they're not famous people. They are regular people who have figured out how to use their influence, how to
Hmm.
use their creativity,
Yeah.
how to be persuasive, how to get creative, right? How to network with people. These are the same skills I was just talking about, right? And so
Right.
I also tell people that like teachers still today will be like, all these kids want to be influencers. They're not going to be that. And I keep saying to them, you need to stop saying that they can't be influencers. Number one, because when we dig into what influencers are doing, those are all skills we want every young person to have. But two, in a realistic way, like my brother's an influencer, straight up. That's how he makes his money. He's an influencer on Instagram, Mel Fashion. And like, that's what he does. And that's a real thing. And so I think when we think about how we're preparing students, it's not about preparing them just for specific careers. It's about preparing them to build up specific skills and mindsets that they then can apply to future careers that will be coming up. And I think what's really interesting is that there's a set of career clusters put out by Advanced CTE. And those career clusters were just redone. And they moved away from this old school methodology of like, this is the career cluster of hospitality and transportation. This is the,
Right.
Health sciences. And now they're also matched up with skills. And so now you actually can look at career clusters also that are grouped. I think they might call them mindsets or skills, so that we can start talking to young people about skills like communication and what careers might actually tap into communication versus, oh, you want to be a reporter? That requires communication, right? Instead, we're starting from the learning and starting from the skill they have and then starting to explore what careers are out there that match that, which is very different than what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah, no, it's taking the opposite approach. It's giving them as they progress into this world with so many different possibilities and turns, right? What would you like to do with the skills that you've now developed that are transferable to all these other things? And then you can learn the basic information for this. You can learn those things as you go. These really core, essentials we learn, right from the roots. That's beautiful.
And here's the thing, teachers, educators, and we shouldn't expect them to know all the jobs that are out there, right? But I think this is also the place where educators can tap into certain AIs and certain tools that are out there to help them understand or explore, right? I have a student who's really strong at these three things, like what might be out there for them, right?
Yeah.
But I also think when we pose it to students as, you've identified your top three skills or mindsets that you have that like are propelling you forward, what can you do with them? It actually doesn't put a period at the end of the sentence. It's like the sky's the limit. And so they might even start to come up with jobs that we don't know about or don't even exist yet because we started from a place of what skills you have and what mindsets you have, not what you want to be as a career.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you mentioned these AI tools, and I'm curious, is there any technology that you're excited about implementing or that you have implemented so far that's worked well or has been exciting in this process, or maybe something newer?
Yeah, I mean, I think a few things. Don't think we can minimize, I think this idea that we shouldn't be using AI in schools and we shouldn't be teaching students about AI ethics. And like, we heard way too many stories about students who teachers and, my nephew, my good friend's kids, who's bright kids who teachers are saying you used AI to do this. And they're like, well, I didn't, right? Or they're not using it. They weren't taught how to use it in the right way. And so I do think that there is some very basic work that we need to do with young people to understand the power of AI, right? What, their role should be in utilizing it, how to use it in an ethical way and in a way that supports their learning. Because here's the thing, it's not going away. And so it's almost like before a calculator came out, like we want kids to know how to use calculators. I say to middle and high school teachers all the time when kids are like busy trying to do like their fluency work. And I'm like, are you trying to get them to do multiplication tables or are you trying to get them to do trigonometry? Because if we're trying to get them to do trigonometry, give them a calculator. They will always have it in front of them for these types of rigorous things. We don't need to worry. The kid doesn't need to spend all that time doing multiplication facts when we're approaching a more rigorous content and they can use a tool to help them, right? And so we talk about scaffolds in schools all the time, scaffolds we use to support young people in their learning, whether that is a graphic organizer, whether that's an anchor chart, whether that's the use of a technology tool. So why do we put this like wall up when it comes to something as simple as a ChatGPT or another simple AI and students and say like, it's a no for everything? Doesn't make sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of debate right now, and there's a lot of concern, and there's clearly ways that this technology can be used that would shortcut the work and creative thinking of the individual. But there's also ways that are just realistic, like you said. These things aren't going away. And then
Yeah.
there's
There is so much creativity that teachers have to put into their work on a daily basis, even if they're given a scripted curriculum. And why not have a thought partner? I have used my ChatGPT numerous times in the past year to just say, like, I'm looking to start brainstorming ideas on this thing. Like,
yeah,
when you think about, these keywords or reaching this goal, like brainstorm 25 ideas that I might get my thoughts
exactly.
going. And I think there are some ways to do that and teach teachers how to use their AIs and different, and I mentioned ChatGPT just because that's like in my head is something I use regularly. But there are lots of AIs out there. There are ones that are creating rubrics. There are ones that are helping to create lesson plans, right? But there are so many tools. We don't have to be afraid to use them. We do need to know how to review them to make sure
Exactly.
that the work is accurate, to make sure it's giving us what we want, to refine it, to feed it the prompts that will give us the things we want. But I think this shouldn't be something we're afraid of. There's so many times, especially in the past year, where I'm like, I can't believe I actually would have spent, you know, 20 minutes trying to figure out how to reorganize this one paragraph, right?
Right. Right.
Instead, I can say like, hey, can you help me reorganize this paragraph? Because, I feel like it's not perfect, and it will give me some suggestions. I think we have to teach people how to use these tools. I think when we think about what's coming in the future for education and for teaching, we are seeing more and more content that is and can be delivered through technology. And we might see the roles of teachers shift a little bit because the number of people going into the teaching profession is getting less. And I supervise student teachers across Philadelphia, and I can say that. And we are going to have to start being creative and thinking about what the role of a human adult is going to be in education versus technology.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, like you said, there's ways that we can use it creatively to expand our thought process and our creativity
Hmm.
and expand
Yeah.
our
Oh,
output and
yeah.
save times on the things that don't matter as much and let us spend more time on the things that, really
Sure.
where we can bring that back to the unique skills we have, we bring the unique skills and then we can save time with the
Correct.
technology.
And we bring the human centered skills,
Exactly.
right? Too,
The
like
humanity to it.
that I think
Hmm.
is important.
Yeah. Beautiful. So when it comes to the next year, I'm really curious to hear what Innovageous is focused on. Like maybe some of the main goals are that you want to achieve as you
Yeah.
expand or as you develop your programs.
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually just started the Goldman Sachs Small Business Program. I'm in week 2. And so they are asking a lot of these similar questions in a
Perfect
more
timing.
academic way.
Yeah, yeah.
um, I think there's a few things. Number one, in our first, 4.5 years, we learned a lot of lessons. And something that was weighing really heavy on our heart was just this idea that our services and our support of schools is not equitable. We are a small business. If you have funds in your budget or you received a grant, right, we can partner. In some cases, we work with other organizations who get grants, and then we're able to provide services to schools at no cost. But the bottom line is there are schools, especially here in Philadelphia, where one block there's a school that has plenty of extra money. And
Mhm.
then down the block, there's another school where the teachers have like paper rations. And this is the truth here in Philadelphia. And so that was weighing really heavy on our hearts. And so we spent time in the past year developing our Innovageous school design, which is not about creating new schools. It is about rethinking schools. It is about designing possibly some new schools or approaches, but it's really based in this idea that we know schools have foundational practices around instructions, around operation, around school culture. But when we take it to the next step, an Innovageous school has human centered wellness, is community focused, has global empathy, and embodies an entrepreneurial mindset. And so
Mhm.
we spent the past year building out resource centers and tools for each of these principles of our Innovageous school design that is now on our website. And so I would say one of our priorities for the upcoming year is to definitely ensure that schools both are accessing the free resources, which include frameworks, implementation tools, curriculum ideas, indicator lists, self-reflections, right? Lots of different things, but also aiming to work with schools specifically within one or more of the principles. And so having schools that we engage with that are looking to build entrepreneurial mindsets across the school, that's not just with students, it's with staff, it's in systems, right? Who want to integrate global empathy and make sure that that is prominent. And so that's one of our first things, is ensuring that people are using the resources that are out there, it's on our website, and that we're engaging with schools specifically around one of these four principles. We engage with a lot of schools around foundational practices, and we engage with schools in these principles as well, but we want to start moving into more significant work in that area. I think the other thing is, for us, we definitely, our sectors around working with schools and higher ed and nonprofits is very education based. And it's really interesting because I've always thought that education doesn't happen just in a school during the school day. And if you read my book, you'll learn why. But for me, education is about schools, nonprofits, ed tech companies, governments, right? Education is a system. And so it's time maybe for us to start thinking about within that system, right? And working more intentionally and collaboratively with philanthropists, with ed tech companies, to make sure that what's happening aligns with capacity building, aligns with our mission, ensures continuity of learning and inclusive opportunities for all students. And so that's something else that's upcoming for us, is really thinking intentionally about how we're partnering with different educational institutions, not just schools and traditional nonprofits.
Wow, that's powerful. Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful that you're expanding just making it available, all these tools that you already have and all these frameworks, just to
Yeah.
make it more accessible
Yep.
because like you said, there's a really wide range of,
Yeah.
you know, and also it's also really cool to hear that you're expanding your scope into these different
Yeah.
areas of education and tech. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Because even adult learning, right?
exactly.
I mentioned I'm going through the Goldman Sachs program. I mentioned that. And it's really interesting because the how of how they're doing it, right? Through teaching and through the use of Canvas and through doing like virtual groups and breakout rooms and discussion boards is all very stuff I'm deeply experienced in, have been doing for decades. But the content, I'm totally brand new. But it does make me think, and our team think, about the ability to work with companies, right, to revamp their adult learning systems, because in every adult company, we're looking to provide professional development. So I think within all these areas, there's just an opportunity for bringing our mission into these spaces of learning and where learning happens, which is not just in a school.
Yeah, it's a holistic thing. It's a total, yeah, from the
Yeah.
start of the day to the end of the day.
Hmm.
Um, this is a question I love to ask my guests because everyone has such a different answer. But if you could, when it comes to the next steps for Innovageous and the challenges that might be ahead, if you could rapidly solve one problem very quickly and easily, what might that be? I know you're laughing now because, yeah, if you could pick just one.
I mean, I think like the thing that came to my head first is around funding.
Yeah.
I would, if I could somehow wave my magic wand and make sure there was equitable funding. Don't ask me what I mean by equitable, because I think it requires a lot of work to figure out what is that formula that provides equity in funding. I think if I was going to wave my second wand, I would say, like, all of a sudden there's just this really strong desire for people to be teachers, and that teachers are highly valued, which of course comes along with the funding and money. But I think that's just something we can put that aside, right? And so I think if somehow we could end up with a really strong future workforce, that would also help to not solve problems, but provide foundation, which is what we need, right? If we don't have highly qualified teachers that are beyond warm bodies who can supervise students, and we don't have money, then we can't do any of the other things that we want to do to educate young people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just imagine if those things were solved like
I would
yeah,
love
yeah,
to. It's challenging because it's across the United States, right? And there are many,
absolutely.
obviously, this is named over and over and over, but there are many efforts to increase, especially the teacher pipeline. I mean,
Mhm.
there's there's local efforts, there's nationwide efforts, right, to build that pipeline. And just so far, it's not like there's this huge tidal wave of new teachers coming. So fingers crossed.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we'll have to see. In the next couple of years, especially, it's going to be a very interesting change to a lot of
Mhm.
areas of culture. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So, are there any closing words of wisdom you have, either to someone who's going into schools right now and aiming to improve things, or even to
Yeah.
future teachers, perhaps?
Yeah. I would say go slow to go fast. Sometimes we have to take things slow and do planning so that we can accelerate how we want to, right? Even today, I was at a school I haven't been at in 2 years, and I saw so many things that we had worked with them on over 2 years that are now being implemented or just part of their community. And so we might not have seen it happen indirectly, our work, but clearly the planning and the process then allows schools to implement and accelerate. And so I would
Mhm.
just say, as you're working through things, identify what root causes are, gather data, don't come with opinion, come with fact, and make sure that you are taking the time to implement with fidelity and not just keep running, which I'm going to be honest is something that I work on myself every day. I am a
Oh,
action oriented, always running type person, and sometimes I do have to slow down. And so that would be my advice for people. And my second piece of advice would just be to not forget that in education we are also responsible for this next generation who's going to, for all intents and purposes, take care of us.
oh,
And so we have to think about them as people, as future adults, as contributing citizens, and make sure that we're fostering that every single day.
yeah, beautifully said. Yeah, absolutely. We are investing in this future generation, which there are so many bright possibilities, and yet it takes
Yeah.
that attention and that focus to,
Yes.
yeah, really keep that in mind and really have the vision
Yeah.
for that. Yeah,
Yeah,
beautifully
and
said.
obviously access the library, right? Go to our website, Innovageous. There is a
Yeah,
ton of free things, including professional developments and resources. You can also reach us in that way. There's a place to set up a meeting or send us a message to learn more because we're always better together and we're always looking to learn more about what's happening across the country in education.
incredible. Great. We'll make sure to link your book to Leading Future Focused
Perfect.
Schools in the show notes and your website. And is there any other way that you'd like people to connect with you or get in
Yeah,
touch?
I mean, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, Shira Wolf Cohen, Wolf like two O's like Virginia. You can also go to innovageous.com, obviously, and do the things I said around contacting us, but you can reach out to me, Shira at innovageous.com. And so feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'd love to hear from people and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the book. You can pick it up on Amazon. If you want to order more than 9 copies, I always say do it through our website because I want to give you a deal. Uh, you know, looking forward to connecting with people more.
Well, Shira, thanks for sharing all your wisdom, how you've been going into future, shape the future of education, and all your thoughts and opinions on the, what's coming. So appreciate your time
Thanks
and
for
all your
having me.
insights. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. It was nice chatting with you.
Okay. Thank you.